And welcome back to the Jewish-Anglican. How you doing? How you doing? Let me adjust my seat. It's been a bit. Sorry, I look like Han Solo, I realized, with this vest and shirt on. That was a total accident. I'm not cosplaying as Han Solo. I'll never cosplay as Han Solo, probably. My mistake. We'll talk about the Anglosphere mythology. Now, of course, why do we have to address this? Does the Anglosphere have a mythology? Does the Anglosphere need a mythology? And when I mean Anglosphere, this is probably a big important side tangent, trust me. I mean kind of the Anglo-Celtic people from Britain, America, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. That's what I mean by Anglosphere. It's just, Anglo-Celtic people from those 5 nations is a bit of a mouthful now, isn't it? Yes. Now, that was kind of for the uninitiated, if there's any new viewers in the audience. And a mythology is a collective of possibly real or possibly unreal stories that are part of our culture. Now, Professor Tolkien and Professor Lewis have a very unique take on the word mythology, and that is just a collection of stories, and it doesn't really matter if it's true or untrue, as what makes Christianity very interesting because it is a true mythology. Strangely enough, a syndicalist thinker had a very similar belief that every ideology has some type of core myth. The socialists have the myth of, rising against the upper class and, overthrowing them. Every belief has some type of foundation myth that pushes them forward. So when I use myth, I don't think of it as untrue necessarily, but just as part of our culture that pushes us. Here are kind of my top 5 mythologies for the Anglosphere. My requirements are that it has to be from the Anglosphere, obviously. It has to be, and every English speaker would have to at least be somewhat aware of the story, or at least have heard about it. And finally, there's probably some more I'm missing, but I think those are some fair requirements. Every English speaker has at least heard or knows something about it, and we can feel it in our culture to some degree. So let's begin with, without further ado, not really! An honorary mention goes to the Canterbury Tales, written by Geoffrey Chaucer. I have not read the Canterbury Tales. I have it. I still have not read it. I got some other projects to finish, but I feel like this is a good folklore, more fairy tale than mythology. Sorry to all the Canterbury fans out there, but this goes into the honorary mention list. Editing Jewish-Anglican here, I just wanted to clarify one more thing before we actually dive into the top 5, and that is, I don't think the Anglosphere needs a mythology. However, I do think we do have some shared stories, and we should at least acknowledge we have some shared stories, and I'm going to rank them as I see fit. We don't necessarily need a mythology, but I do think we have some form of myths and legends and stories we pass on to the next generation and the next one after that. Possible candidate for Anglosphere mythology, or our first shared mythology in folklore, is The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes.
Yes.
I'm a little odd to you, but every English speaker has probably heard of Sherlock Holmes to one degree or another. I mean, literally every modern day detective character will eventually be compared to Sherlock Holmes. He is probably one of the most intelligent character written in fiction, and plus, he himself was for the Anglosphere. Sherlock Holmes exploded in popularity in America and in Britain. And Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wanted the Anglosphere to be united because he believed that America did not have a strong military presence like how Europe did, but it was economically moving further and further away from Europe. So, for the benefit of the British Empire and America during the Sherlock Holmes era, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle thought it would only make sense if we united. Not a bad argument there, but again, Sherlock Holmes doesn't really feel like a mythology, but people do mistake it for history sometimes, so that's why it's kind of a number 5. But overall, I would recommend everyone to at least try reading one story. I read a few. I still haven't read Studying Scarlet yet, which I've heard it has Mormon ninjas or something, but that's a story for another time. This one hurts. This one hurts to put in number 4 because it really is technically the Anglo mythology. But that doesn't mean it's good. Beowulf.
You come to Denmark costumed for war. Chainmail and swords. There's a dress code. You're denied.
Use the Tolkien translation, which already... That's my problem. I use the Tolkien translation. No disrespect to Tolkien. I'm a big fan of J.R.R. Tolkien. Don't get me wrong. I love Tolkien. You'll see in a few. But his translation of Beowulf is not that great. It's very archaic for English speakers. It's also just... He himself was not really a fan of it, especially since this was in his younger days. So, I know Graham Shepper has made an entire video about what the best translation of Beowulf is. In fact, if you want anything to do with Old English, go and watch Graham Shepper. Great guy, great linguist. He just seems like a very wholesome man. Anyways, that's my ranting and glazing about Graham Shepper and his Old English. But overall, Beowulf follows the story of a warrior named Beowulf, which doesn't actually mean Beowulf as some people think it does. Although I actually do have which is funny since I actually have an ancestor named Arthur Wolf, which literally means Beowulf. So I have an ancestor more in line to what people think Beowulf is than actual Beowulf's name. Weird. I mean, it definitely has a certain rhythm, and if you're not used to it, yeah, it's a little weird. But Beowulf is a fun story. But again, it definitely feels more like a legend than necessarily our shared mythology. And plus, sadly, not a lot of people have heard of Beowulf compared to a lot of the other stuff I'm going to list afterwards. In fact, more people have heard of Sherlock Holmes than Beowulf. But I've included this as a number 4 just because it is literally our only Anglo mythology we have that is even somewhat relevant. So I kind of feel like that was written in Old English. It feels like I kind of had to include it. But sadly, this is number 4. I don't want it to be number 4, but it is. This one is a bit of a curveball. I'll admit it. Robin Hood. Now, the reason I'm using the Kevin Costner DVD is because I actually don't have any Robin Hood literature.
Unlike some other Robin Hoods, I can speak with an English accent.
I know. I'm surprised too. I don't know how I don't have any Robin Hood literature. Put in Robin Hood literature down in the comments. What's your recommendation? So just pretend this is a giant book. I would argue Robin Hood should be number 3 as the definitive Anglosphere mythology. Especially for Americans, this might be a better introduction to the Anglosphere from an American point of view than the full shared mythology, because Robin Hood is a story about an upperclassman, in some versions, fighting against a tyrannical government over laying taxes. That sounds like the American Revolution to me, but no, it's about an Englishman who fought in the Crusades, served King Richard the Lionheart, who was incredibly popular, and then went on to fight his younger brother. I think that's a great tale, and it should be in number 3 of our shared mythology. I think it's a great legend. The top 3 in this list could really be debated. The first 2 are like, it's like, oh, who cares about those? They're great, but they're not really mythology. But the latter 3 could all be debated for number 1 to some degree. But I should probably watch the Kevin Costner film since I have it. Also, look at how weird this case is. I've never seen a stranger case than this. Anyways, so yeah, please recommend Robin Hood literature. And also, do you think Robin Hood should be in the top 3 best Anglosphere mythologies? Or at least a contender for it? I think it should. This is better for the Americans to be introduced into the Anglosphere than full-on Anglosphere mythology, if that makes sense. These are just the ones that look right together. Middle Earth. The Silmarillion, The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings. This is our mythology. I gotta put this down because it's heavy. This is number 2. For a couple reasons. First of all, Tolkien wanted Middle Earth to kind of be an English mythology. At least at first. People have debated if he still wanted it as he continued writing it. I don't know. but it is undeniably seeped into our culture. You know how we spell dwarves and elves like that? That's not how they were always spelled. They were spelled like this. Yeah, dwarfs and elves. Not elves, elves, and dwarfs. But Tolkien came along and said, this should be changed. This is not how usual regular English spelling works. Now, there were some people before him, but he was the one to popularize it. And also, arguably, modern day fantasy wouldn't be as... It would probably still exist, but in a very different way from Tolkien. So, Lord of the Rings combines pagan image... not necessarily pagan imagery, but definitely other, like, Nordic mythology with pure Christianity as a whole, which I gotta say is awesome. I think you could have a much stronger argument than I'm making about Lord of the Rings being our shared mythology. Just take the Lord of the Rings films, for example. That is so Anglosphere when you think about it. I mean, Lord of the Rings. An Englishman who was born in South Africa writes an English book. It becomes really popular in America in the 60s. Then cut to years later, a New Zealand director tries to make it. He does. Films in New Zealand, uses American, British, and Australian, and probably some Canadian actors. I actually have no idea what Canadian actors were involved in Lord of the Rings, all together to make one of the greatest films of all time. And mind you, Lord of the Rings is considered the pinnacle of filmmaking success by a lot of people, even like Ben Shapiro of all people. And the fact Ben Shapiro had to fight against Matt Walsh on his terrible Lord of the Rings opinion, which, by the way, Matt Walsh should not be able to review fiction ever again. He has terrible opinions on fiction. Anyways, rant over. Lord of the Rings is definitely our shared mythology, at least number 2, along with another one. And this one might be a little controversial, but I think the number 1 Anglosphere... Anglosphere mythology, along with Lord of the Rings, because I think these two are so inseparable in some ways, because they're honestly Robin Hood, Lord of the Rings, and the next one are so tied together in terms of how we think of them and how just ancient they feel. And people ask, at least with Robin Hood and the next one, are they even real history? And some people think Tolkien's could have been a prophet or something. I've seen some weird conspiracy theories about that. And that, of course, is the Arthurian mythos. I only have Le Morte d'Arthur and Sir Gawain the Green Knight, which I'm actually taking. I'm currently annotating Sir Gawain the Green Knight because I'm studying it for both personal and educational reasons. I'm thinking about adapting it into a stage play. Wish me luck. Anyways, so yeah, I would argue that King Arthur is the number 1 mythological Anglosphere mythology to share. One of the reasons is because it's King Arthur. Everybody has heard about the sword and the stone to some degree, about some guy pulling a sword out of the stone and becoming king of the Britons. From Monty Python to the Disney version, you can't deny that King Arthur is incredibly popular. There's something about this character that keeps showing up time and time over and over again. Even as of recent, in 2021, A24's Sir Gawain in The Green Knight, which I have not seen it. Would you recommend it? I am very apprehensive to A24 since they seem very pretentious, but I could be wrong. But so yeah, I find the Arthurian mythos to be kind of the best, at least the most romantic. It combines elements of the Celtic folklore with a lot of Christian imagery like the Holy Grail or the fact that Merlin was supposed to be the Antichrist, but he was baptized, so he became a Christian, but still had powers. Merlin is a very strange figure. I'm not sure how exactly that works, that whole thing, but I mean, the Arthurian mythos is very fascinating. I think this Lord of the Rings and Robin Hood are the top 3. You could probably make an argument with Arthurian and Robin Hood, but with Lord of the Rings, I mean, it's like maybe, but that depends. But am I saying Arthurian mythos is the best mythology, the most accurate mythology for us? What is this to the Anglosphere? Because on one hand, America isn't a fan of kings, although I have heard the argument that perhaps it's more meritocracy-based monarchy than hereditary. I've heard some arguments from Americans like that, which I guess that's what I guess that's one American lens. I think at the end of the day, the Arthurian mythos, along with the Middle Earth mythos and Robin Hood and almost all these myths have held and been part of our hearts for a very long time. Nearly everyone in our culture has heard about these to some degree. And is it important that we have a shared mythology? Maybe not, but when you think about it, you can't deny it has impacted the Anglosphere. Everyone has heard of these to some degree. And I think that's just fantastic. They say that there's no monoculture left, which I think I agree and disagree. There's no current monoculture, but there is the monoculture of the past, which has passed. And over hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of years since Arthur. It's almost been 1,000 years since the first mention of Arthur. Hundreds upon hundreds of years since Robin Hood. Only 100 and some, almost 200 since Sherlock Holmes. Almost 1,000, over 1,000, it must be over 1,000 since Beowulf, and barely even a century since The Hobbit released. And yet, all these stories have touched us. All these stories have remained in our collective minds, our collective thoughts. At the end of the day, we share all these stories. They're all our mythology to one degree or another. This Anglosphere, this blessed little land that started in England and spread across the world. I'm filming this on, I think it's New Zealand Day. It's February 6th of 2026, and I think it's New Zealand Day, I think, fact check me. But, I want this to be a reminder. No matter what, we have these stories to inspire us. And they all come from the great, true myth. At the end of the day, they all come from the great, one, true myth. The true myth of our Lord Jesus Christ. I hope you've enjoyed, and God bless.